There is a kind of person who walks into a room and immediately knows something is wrong. Not wrong in any dramatic sense, no alarms, no visible crisis, just something. A slight tension in the way two people are standing, the way someone's laugh came half a second too late, the painting on the wall that's been moved just slightly since the last time they were here. Most people don't notice these things. This person cannot stop noticing them, and for a long time, they thought that was a gift. In 1996, psychologist Elaine Aron introduced a concept she called the highly sensitive person, someone whose nervous system processes sensory and emotional information with unusual depth and thoroughness. Roughly 15 to 20% of the population, she argued, are born with this trait. They are not fragile. They are not broken. They are simply turned up. And for a while, this framing feels liberating, to understand yourself as someone who simply perceives more. But there is something the framework doesn't quite say out loud. More data is not the same as more peace. Here is the thing about noticing. It doesn't end there. The human mind, any human mind, is a meaning-making machine. We don't just receive experience, we interpret it, we organize it, and we ask, instinctively and compulsively, what does this mean? The philosopher Albert Camus called this the absurd, the collision between a human need for meaning and the world's stubborn silence on the matter. We are creatures who demand that things make sense, and the world, largely, refuses. But most people are protected from this collision by something simple. They don't notice enough to feel it so acutely. That's why they say ignorance is bliss. The noticer has no such protection. Every micro-expression demands a reading. Every inconsistency demands a theory. Every silence, in a conversation, in a relationship, in the universe, feels like a question that must be answered. Psychologists call this tendency apophenia, the perception of meaningful connections between unrelated things. At low levels, it's creativity. At high levels, it's exhausting. And for the deeply perceptive, it runs constantly, in the background, like a process that never sleeps. The sociologist Carl Weick describes sensemaking as the way humans construct reality, not passively receiving it, but actively organizing it into coherent narrative. This happened, so that means this, so therefore that. The noticer is a relentless sensemaker, and relentless sensemaking is an extraordinarily difficult way to be happy. There is a concept in cognitive psychology called rumination. It is not the same as reflection. Reflection is purposeful. You revisit an experience to learn from it, and then you put it down. Rumination is different. It is repetitive, circular, and largely involuntary. You return to the same event, the same moment, the same look on someone's face. Not because you've chosen to, but because your mind cannot locate the exit. Research by psychologist Susan Nolan-Huxamer found that ruminative thinking is one of the strongest predictors of depression. Not the events themselves, but the compulsive return to them. And rumination, almost by definition, requires something to ruminate on. The noticer always has material. There is also what psychologists call the negativity bias, the well-documented tendency for negative stimuli to have a stronger psychological impact than equally intense positive ones. Bad is stronger than good. Loss is felt more acutely than gain. Threat registers faster than safety. This bias exists in everyone, but it hits differently when you notice more. If you catch 10 signals where others catch 2, and the negative signals weigh more heavily than the positive, the math is unforgiving. The existential psychologist Irvin Yalom wrote about 4 ultimate concerns that haunt the deeply aware: death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. These are not neurotic obsessions. They are, he argued, the honest confrontations of a mind that sees clearly. Most people are not confronting these things. They are busy, they are distracted, they are, in a sense, mercifully unaware. The noticer cannot afford that mercy. They are too awake for the comfort of forgetting. And yet, there is something else Elaine Aron noted about highly sensitive people, something that doesn't get quoted as often. They also experience joy more intensely. A piece of music doesn't just sound beautiful, it breaks something open. A moment of genuine human connection doesn't just feel good, it feels like proof of something. The first cold morning of autumn. The weight of an old book. A conversation that goes somewhere real. These things are, for the noticer, almost unbearably alive. So we arrive at the paradox. The same capacity that makes peace difficult makes beauty possible. The psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski described what he called overexcitabilities, heightened responses to experience across multiple domains: psychomotor, sensual, intellectual, imaginative, emotional. He believed these weren't pathologies. They were the raw material of what he called positive disintegration, the painful process by which an ordinary self breaks down into something more fully realized. In other words, the suffering isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system working. The poet John Keats wrote about what he called negative capability, the capacity to remain in uncertainty, in doubt, in mystery, without an irritable reaching after fact and reason. He considered it the mark of a deeply creative and human mind. Notice, he didn't call it comfortable, he called it capable. The question is not how to make the noticing stop. The question is whether you can carry it without being crushed by it. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention, true, sustained, selfless attention, is one of the rarest and most sacred acts a human being can perform. To really see someone, to really be present with what is, to notice without immediately converting the noticeable into a problem to be solved. She was writing about love, but she might as well have been writing about the mind itself. The trouble for the noticer is not the noticing. The trouble is what happens next, the automatic, almost involuntary lurch toward meaning. What does this mean? Why did this happen? What does it say about me, about them, about the world? That lurch is understandable. It is in some ways magnificent. It is also relentless. And relentless is not the same as useful. What seems to help, not cure, not resolve, but help, is a subtle shift in relationship to the noticing itself. Not, I notice this, therefore I must understand it, but I notice this, and that is allowed to be enough. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and wrote about the human search for meaning, made a distinction that tends to get lost. Meaning, he said, is not found, it is chosen. It is not out there, embedded in events, waiting to be decoded. It is something you bring to experience, deliberately, freely, humanly. That is a different kind of noticing. Not the noticing that demands an answer, but the noticing that learns, slowly, with great difficulty, to simply witness. To see the thing, to feel it fully, and then, not because it doesn't matter, but because you are more than your interpretation of it, to let it rest. I don't know if that's happiness, but I think it might be something close, something quieter, something that lasts. I hope this can help you find a little more peace, and if you liked this video, consider subscribing for more similar content.